Welcome to Fostering Parenthood. This is a space to hear from other foster parents firsthand about how to support your foster youth with their healthy sexual development. I'm Dorothy Daniels, and I've been a mom and a foster mom for over 42 years. Hi, Tamar. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Dorothy. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad. This is our very first episode, and we chose to talk about a topic I think is very important: consent and bodily autonomy. Our guest is Tamar Sebesta, who will share her experience as a former foster youth and a teen mom. And later, we will have Dayna Freier give her perspective on consent and bodily autonomy as a caregiver. At the end of the episode, we will give you 3 tools you can use to teach your foster youth about consent and bodily autonomy, so stay tuned. When we talk about consent, we mean setting personal boundaries, respecting those of a partner, and checking to make sure there is clear communication. We're not talking about legal consent. Bodily autonomy is the right for a person to govern what happens to their own body without external influence or coercion. We have to remember that foster youth are disproportionately affected by higher rates of pregnancy and STIs, which is sexually transmitted infections, as opposed to other youth. Only 40% of teen mothers finish high school, and fewer than 2% finish college by the age of 30. Tamar is on track to become that part of that very important 2%. She was in the foster care system from age 10 to almost 13 and became a mom herself at the age of 15. She graduated high school in 2019 and is now working toward, 4 associate degrees, and has been accepted to San Diego State University to continue her journey in the fall. And she will be studying communications. Tamar, so impressive. Congratulations on your perseverance and your success. And I want to thank you for coming on this podcast and being our very first guest on Fostering Parenthood.
Thank you for having me. It's definitely been a very long and treacherous journey getting to this point, but I'm really excited to see what the future has in store for me.
I'm sure I have no doubt that it is going to be a wonderful future. I hear that you're writing a paper on consent and boundaries for the Reproductive Health Equity Project. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we wanted to come up with a few important blog topics to talk to with caregivers and former foster youth. And I came up with the idea of consent because I feel like it's such an important topic that so many of
Mm.
us in care didn't have anyone there to talk to us about. And if we can at least touch the lives of a few people, it could really make the huge difference. It just takes one person. So I've been in the
Absolutely.
middle of writing a paper with different statistics and personal experience about consent and what goes along with that.
Wow, I bet that personal experience though is really going to come in, to play, right? When you try to talk about these very serious but very important topics. And I'm just wondering what challenges and experiences you had as a foster youth in regards to consent.
Yeah, so I've had experience in multiple different areas, especially when it comes to relationships and healthy versus unhealthy
Mm.
things along hookup culture and consent just within that. And being a teen mom, and I feel like a lot of that had to go down with the feeling of how trauma impacts your decision making and how that influences your not need for attention, but just where you look for love. And I really wish that people were there to tell me that I was loved and that I have support and care right here, or else I probably wouldn't have made a lot of those decisions and had those hard conversations about what consent looked like. And because of those experiences, I had thought that things that were not normal were normal. And I wish someone was there to be there and tell me that it wasn't okay, and to be, I guess, my sort of advocating adult, and I did not have that.
That must have been a true challenge. I'm wondering, so much of the time as caregivers, we think that we're saying all the right things, right? We think that we're validating and giving that attention. What was it that you needed specifically to hear that would have allowed you to perhaps make a different choice? I know you were a teen parent at 15. Um, I don't know if you could share with me if it was an intentional pregnancy or an unintentional pregnancy, and what was going through your mind?
Yeah. So I definitely would say that because of my young age, I personally had a lot of experiences way too young. I lost my virginity at a really young age, and I had a lot of traumatic experiences along before that. Um, my son and his father, that was the only healthy relationship, well,
Mm,
quote unquote, what healthy was to me at the time. And I feel like it was the closest thing I had to a family. And growing up, I had this angst against adults in my life. I felt like all adults were evil and all adults were bad, and I was always looked upon as the rebellious kid and the one who had a bad family. So because of that, I didn't trust anybody, and I think that I needed someone to really look me in the eyes and say like, "You're not a bad kid, you're just a hurt kid," and understand
mm,
what I needed, and no one was there to do that for me. And I feel like there was so much just societal pressure going on, and I wish I had more support than, I guess, pressure from people who didn't have my life, and didn't have my experiences. I wish that I really had people in my life who really knew me and knew what I had went
mm.
through and were there to not just support me, but to advise me, you know?
Absolutely, because oftentimes when we think of bodily autonomy, we just assume that folks are going to make the correct decision, right? Like, I want to, I don't want to, I have consent, I don't want to give consent. But sometimes it's about what the youth is going through in that trauma that they've experienced, and to be able to validate, right, those experiences, to be able to say. The choices you're making need to be based on kind of a healthy perspective, right? And when you're giving consent to someone to touch your body, is that truly what you want, or is that what you need based on a feeling of insecurity, a feeling of not feeling loved, not feeling valued? Do you agree?
I do, and I feel like as a society there it really is hard for me because I grew up in a very Christian environment, and
Mhm,
I'm currently not very religious, but I think that making sure that those things are set aside
mhm,
because it's not, I think, appropriate to base your beliefs on someone who's so young and vulnerable.
mm,
I think that is their choice to make as they get older, but still understanding that there is a boundary between healthy versus unhealthy consent, and understanding that some relationships are okay and what is, I guess, appropriate. I feel like there is no age appropriate, but what's appropriate for your experiences and what should be happening, and understanding if you're going to be involved in these things, then you need to have an OB, you need to know what protection there is, and just
mhm,
respecting those decisions comes with self-respect. And I think that
mm.
inspiring self-respect in young adults in foster care is really going to be the key to helping them become healthy relationships, to be in healthy relationships and become healthy individuals.
I agree 100%. We can talk about what consent looks like. We can talk about bodily autonomy. But if we don't have a sense of self respect, then why would I make those healthy choices? Right. So we really need to go back and look at the youth for where they are, not where we want them to be. Right. And start bringing them to a point where they are able to see more clearly what their choices are so they can make the right choice for themselves.
Exactly, and a lot of that has to do with looking back at the family because everyone's, situation is completely different, and understanding that when you were younger is really the most informative years, and that's when your, I guess, trauma responses are gonna be based, and how you're
Mhm,
gonna react in the future is really truly based off of how you were treated when you were younger, and treating those things at the root, they're gonna hurt, but you can't just put a Band-Aid on it, and you can't just tell us how it should be without really
mhm,
trying to heal us. And I feel like people just try to fix it from where they are now instead of looking back because it's harder to do that. But it's those harder conversations and those harder experiences that really help shape you.
I'm hearing you say that so much, and I cherish it because what's really important is the person, right? It's not about what needs to be taught. It's about who you're teaching and exactly where that person, that youth is at that moment. I just want to thank you so much, Tamar, for being here, for sharing from your heart, for being so vulnerable and transparent because these aren't easy topics. Um, Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have been here.
Oh, I wanted to bring um, some very important information about, and just kind of a shout out to Gabriel Laza. He is a caregiver and he came up with the name Fostering Parenthood for our podcast. And when we started this podcast, we asked many caregivers what they wanted out of this podcast. And based on their comments and suggestions, decisions were made based on their valued input. So thank you to all who participated in making this podcast meaningful. Dayna, thank you for joining today. I do want to share with our audience that you have your bachelor's degree in social work. So you were a social worker at one time. And you also have your master's degree in organizational leadership, which is very important to me because you are the director of operations of Fostering Unity, an organization that I started to support foster care or for to support foster care in general, but specifically the caregivers who do that hard work. So thank you for joining us. Dayna, can you share with us what experience you have as a mom?
I can. So, not only do I work in this field, but I am a former foster parent and have 5 children. And my youngest, they're all adults now, but my youngest of the 5 was adopted through the child welfare system. So, I
Wow.
not only work in the field, I'm passionate about caregivers and foster children.
Wow. Wow. Do you have any relationships with any of the kiddos that used to be in your home as a foster child?
I do. I
Oh,
do. I
wow.
supported the reunification of 4 of, I call them my littles, 4 littles that entered our lives through foster care and were reunited with their mother. And their mother and I have joined forces. And now I am Aunt Dana and
Mm.
extended family for those 4 children who wonderfully reunited with their mom.
Congratulations on that. Far too few of us have that ability to stay connected with those kiddos that we work so hard to serve. Well, thank you for doing that. Well,
Yeah,
we're
they're a
going to
big part of
dive.
my life.
I bet they are, and they're blessed. So, we're going to dive right into consent and bodily autonomy. And first, we'll talk about consent. When you were raising your children, especially your foster children, how did you approach the issue of consent?
So I think the approach was different depending on the ages of the children.
Mhm,
When what I call my littles, the children who were unified with their mom, they were younger when they entered my home,
mhm,
and just watching the body language and their reluctance and things like that, I really had to stop and think that I didn't know what experiences they had had prior to coming into my home, and the simple things like asking, do you need a hug? Would you
mhm,
like a hug? Is a hug okay? Asking before you touch or help, pat on the back. And so I think that consent doesn't start at preteen years, right? That conversation. It starts when they're younger, when you're in their space, they're in your space, and making sure that they start feeling that body autonomy that leads to, yes, you can give me a hug, or I would like a hug, Aunt Dana. So
mm,
with the littles, it was a little bit different, and then, obviously, having 5 kids who are now young adults, we talked about consent in the sense of sexual consent. And that conversation really, I think, also started younger as well, but then leads to different types of consent, right? Freely given consent,
mhm,
right? You have the right to give it and you have the right to not give it. Also, the reversible consent, right? That you can be in one situation one day with somebody and you give consent. You're in another situation another day with that same person, and that consent doesn't move to the next situation, you have the right to give consent in each situation
I
and
love the way
informed.
right, I love the way you said that though, I mean, even as a grown adult who I've never been in the foster care system. I have days when I want a hug and days when I kind of just want you to keep your like 5 foot boundary. Nothing to do with COVID, just, stay
Right.
back. Don't really want that right now. And I think that as we talk about consent, it's such a bigger issue than just what we assume we're going to need someday when we're older and we're consenting in a sexual way, right?
Right.
And so many of our kids, depending on what journey they traveled before they came to our home, whether they're a kiddo who resists touch and
Mhm.
who is more reserved, as opposed to a kiddo who has no boundaries, right? They'll hug the
Right.
hostess at the restaurant, right? And you're like, oh, honey, that's a stranger. Let's come back over here. We really do have to approach it differently.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something as caregivers we need to right off the bat start to observe our kiddos when they enter our home and ask kind of those tough questions like, do you like to be hugged? Do you not like to be hugged? And you have the right to control who touches your body, even at a young age.
Mhm.
So, what I do, even with my newborns, my infants, is I don't need to ask permission to change their diaper, but I narrate it, right?
Mhm.
Okay, we're
Mhm.
going to change your diaper, and here we go, and letting them know what is going to happen, and then later giving them permission. Do you need help with bathing? Would you like me to touch you or can I touch you to help you? What do you think
Mhm.
about that? Do you think that's important?
I think it's very important. Again, we don't know the history of the children
Yeah.
coming into our homes and into our care. And so I
Mhm.
think that observation is good. And I think labeling for the younger ones. Did you need help with your pants? Do you need help with your shirt?
Mm,
And then also the point that you brought up about teaching our children to ask consent from others as
mhm.
well, right? Um, that they have the right to hugged or not be hugged or be asked for that, but they also have the responsibility to ask others, "Is it okay if I hug you?" Right? That consent is important. Giving and offering that.
I love that point too because I had a young child come into my home, and because of what abuse she went through, she often would touch the men coming to our home inappropriately. And so it wasn't so much someone asking her, "Can I hug you?" or "Can I help you?" It was teaching her how to ask others, "May I touch you?" And giving that other person permission to help her with what is appropriate and what's
Right.
not appropriate.
Right. And teaching her that and helping her understand and training her on that helps her so that as she moves forward, people don't have the wrong idea or misinformation, right?
Mhm.
Based on her past history. I think
Mhm.
it's really important that we teach body autonomy and consent in those situations as well, right?
Absolutely. I think that another piece that really plays such a big role to especially body autonomy is that feeling of control over our own body, of feeling that pride, right? That it belongs
Mhm.
to me. This is my body and I feel good about it. And that I have the right to have control and to put up boundaries and
Mhm.
safety around my body. And so I think just complimenting kiddos and giving them that
Mhm.
sense of positive talk, right? Not those negative thoughts that we all get in our head. What do they say? Like 90% of the thoughts that we have at any given time are negative.
Mhm.
Wow, that 10% really gets lost in a lot of really negative messaging that we're giving ourselves. And if we have a negative thought, we're probably more inclined to consent or not say anything if someone were doing something to us. Even if we didn't want to do it, we would think, well, I guess I deserve it, or I guess I have to put up with it. But when we start to, I don't know, when we start to love ourselves, when we start to, as caregivers, breathe that into our kids, you are so beautiful. You are so powerful that the self talk, 90% negative, needs to change. And we need to help them with what that looks like.
Right, I agree, Dorothy, and I think with body autonomy comes that part of the informed consent, right? As I
Mhm.
gain more information, I can change my consent, right?
Mhm.
And that enthusiasm that should come with consent. If I've given consent and I'm all in, I'm enthusiastic about what
Yeah.
I'm ready to engage in. And
Mhm.
and I think it's a whole picture.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we also need to be aware that in foster care, we often see a developmental difference in our kiddos,
Yes.
right? So, what is the age of 18 for one kiddo may not be a developmental age of 18 for any one of our kids. So, again, back to that observation, right? Where is my kiddo? How are they feeling about themselves? Are they prepared to go out into the world and make those choices? And the only way they can do that is to really role play, right?
Right.
And bring that idea of consent and body autonomy from the youngest age you get them. You may have a child come into your home at 13. Well, you didn't have the advantage of the child coming in
Right.
at 3, but you can start where they are and you can start modeling what consent looks like, giving them choices so that they can make good decisions.
Right. I have to say too, when I was talking to my preteen and teenage children about consent, it's that piece of you being able to give consent, and then also that responsibility of getting consent from another person, and recognizing that consent under the influence of anything is
Mm,
really not consent.
yeah.
So it's not just you giving consent, but it's understanding the boundaries around you getting consent.
Absolutely. Can a person that's asleep give consent?
No, no, nope.
And so I think really just having those fun conversations with our youth, right? And
Right.
just kind of opening that door. It doesn't have to be a serious conversation. It doesn't have to be something where they feel they're being scolded. You better
Right.
get consent. It can simply be a great conversation about how we all have the power over our own bodies and we need to listen to each other and respect each other's wishes.
Right. Right. And I think it is really important too that it comes from a place of respect, right? As we're teaching
Mhm.
our youth to respect their own bodies and know when consent feels right to them, then we're also teaching them to be aware of other people's respect of themselves and in getting consent, right? That um, consent comes from a place of, I want to be here. We all want to be in a sexual relationship where both parties want to be there, right?
Yes.
And that's where consent is really important. It's not an obligation, it's a matter of respect, right? Part of it's an obligation, but really comes from a place of respect. I want my partner to consent and be informed and be enthusiastic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. That's so important. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that we wanted to do was give caregivers 3 tools that they can use with their youth because a lot of us as caregivers we're kind of, wow, where do I start?
Right.
How do you spell consent, let alone how do I talk about it, right? And so I think one of the tools that I think is really helpful is the acronym FRIES.
Right.
Now, Dana, you can't have a Diet Coke with those fries,
These are the
okay?
fries that come with a Diet Coke.
I'm sorry, they're not, all right? But fries, F, freely given. My
Right.
consent isn't coerced.
Right.
My consent is freely given, and I receive freely
Mhm.
because both parties, right, have consented, right?
Mm.
R, reversible. I can change my mind.
Right.
I
Very
don't
important. Very
I'm
important.
sorry, but 10 minutes ago, I was on it. But now,
Right.
not so much. We get to change our mind,
Right.
right? And folks have to respect that. Informed, right? I'm
Mhm.
informed. I know what I'm consenting to. And if that changes, if that information
Mhm.
changes, then my
Right.
consent might change, right?
Absolutely. So, an example of that, if you based on the information or leading into a sexual situation, and you've discussed condoms and condoms are agreed upon, and all of a sudden that changes. Well, I actually don't want to use a condom. That information changes, right? And your
Mhm.
consent may change based on the information that you've been given. And that's an
Absolutely.
okay thing,
That's a hard no, right?
right?
I mean, we get to we
Right?
get
It can be a hard no.
Yeah, that's right. We get to decide. We get to
Mhm,
decide. And specific, right?
mhm.
Specific. So, Dana, you have just this amazing tool that you used with your kids, and it's called an out code.
Yeah.
Could could you share that with me? Because that's so cool. I want
Yeah.
an out code.
Right. It's a safety plan, right? Because one thing I know with raising my 5 children is that there could be a situation that they get into where they've used their boundaries, they've felt good about maybe not giving consent, and yet the other person didn't receive that well, or they feel like now I'm in a dangerous situation. So we had just a very simple way that we did it, and I would encourage caregivers, just as long as the youth has a trustworthy adult, they can come up with the plan that works for them with that adult. So with my kids, I was the adult. It was just me, not their dad, that this would work with.
I'm
And we
glad
had
you played the adult. I'm
Yeah,
just
I
saying.
did. I
I'm
played
just
the adult
glad that
very
you
well.
chose to be the adult. Good job.
But they could have chosen their aunt, right? Or they could have chosen
That's
somebody
true.
else, right?
That's very true.
But the plan was, if there was ever an unsafe situation,
Mhm,
that they would text a word to me. And it would be a word that if somebody else grabbed their phone in an
mhm.
unsafe situation, they wouldn't recognize the word. Our word was Mayberry. What I knew is, if I received that from my kids, I wouldn't call to ask. I would get in my car and go directly where they were. Now we also
Mhm,
had to share locations, right? And not
mhm.
because I wanted to be up in their space, because it was a safety plan. So if they used that word, I just dropped everything, went directly to where they were, and I said, "We have a family emergency. I need you to come with me." If in that time they're like, "No, no, no, I'm fine now." Nope, that's not how the safety plan works. You initiate the safety plan. I move immediately without question. You come with me immediately without question. Then we can work through it at home. But the idea of a safety plan is that you're really in a situation you cannot remove yourself from. You need your trusting adult to step in. And so I bring that up in this because we know that, we might be in a situation where we gave consent, we pulled back consent, and is that person accepting it? Am I safe? And so we just called that our out plan, right?
Yeah.
Our safety plan, and
Yeah.
it didn't
Oh,
need additional explanation. We just had one
right.
person who knew it. The word was always the same. The response was always the same.
That's amazing. And I think we should all do that in advance. And it's really not something that you can do at the last minute, right? It's
No,
something that you
no,
would
no. You
do
need to have it planned out.
together
Yep.
as a family, right? Family meeting, which we have in our home quite often.
Hmm.
And wow, that's a great plan. I'm going to implement that as well with my 6 foster kiddos. I think that's
Right.
very, very important. And something that you had said that kind of caught my ear was you said it could be an aunt. And
Mhm.
I think the idea of a trusted adult doesn't always have to be us. Like, we may not
Right.
be the best person in our child's life that has some of these very important conversations. Your child may decide that that trusted adult is a teacher or an aunt or an uncle or a cousin, someone else in their life. The important part is they have at least one person, one adult in their life that is someone they can talk to freely. Don't you agree?
I agree 100%. And they may have multiple trusted adults, right? One
Mhm.
where they can dialogue freely, and then also one for the safety plan, right? Because the safety plan, in order to have it work, has to be well thought out and implemented. And we all know as parents that there are different times in our children's lives that they feel comfortable talking to us, and times when that shifts. And so we want to encourage them through open dialogue, as long as you have somebody, you can go to and talk to. So I think it's kind of two separate things, right? A little overlapped, but always a trusted adult, somebody they can talk through situations with, and somebody who they know if they have to initiate the safety plan, they're going to follow through and help them.
Absolutely. One of the things that's I think is really difficult for caregivers is starting those conversations and how they begin, or even what analogy they could use to better bring home the kind of the concept that you're working on. And one of the things that I used to do with my kiddos is I would use the analogy of an automobile. Because all kids, especially teenagers and preteens, they're all into driving and getting their license. And so what I would tell them is that when you're sitting in a car and you're going someplace, who is the person who is going to make the decision on where you're going? The driver, right?
Right.
So if you're the passenger in that automobile, you're going where that driver is going to drive you. You really don't have a choice. You don't have a brake, you don't have a steering wheel, you don't even have a blinker. So you're pretty much going where that driver is going. And so, what I used to tell my children all the time is you need to make sure before you get in that passenger seat that you're both going in the same place with the
Right.
same idea. Because if you haven't made your mind up in advance and haven't agreed to that location, that destination, you're going to go where the driver takes you. And
Mm.
it's very much like consent. If you're with an individual that you need to consent, especially sexual consent, and you haven't made your mind up, not that you can't make it up that moment, but if you haven't communicated where that destination is going, you're going to go where that other person tells you you're going to go. And so I always try to influence my children or just encourage my children to know where their boundaries are, to know their body autonomy, to be okay with the no, I don't want to
Mhm.
go there. I don't want to go to that destination. I'm comfortable with this destination, but not that destination,
Right.
right?
Right.
And those are decisions that you make before you get in the moment. Not that you can't change your mind, but you want to make sure that you encourage your children to have those conversations with their trusted adult, have those conversations within your own head on where you're willing to go
Right.
and
I
with
think
and with who.
right. I think that's leveled, right? In the sense
Mhm,
that we should be thinking about it in advance,
mhm.
but it doesn't negate your ability to change your mind mid-course, right? That and we all
Absolutely.
know that saying no brings up can bring up like did I make them feel bad? Are they mad at me? And so I think that as
Mhm,
caregivers, if we kind of practice these conversations
mhm.
and practice the reactions with our youth, it will strengthen their confidence in the moment, right? Because saying no, we're reading their reaction. Did I offend them? Are they going to listen to me? And so I encourage caregivers to role play the conversations with your
Mhm,
youth, the different
mhm,
reactions that somebody might have when somebody is saying no, or that's not what I agreed to, or yes, I agreed to that last time, but that's
mhm.
not what I'm agreeing to this time.
That's right. That car's now going back to that destination
Right.
today. Yeah, I got
Right.
it. I got it.
Right.
Well, Dana, I just want to thank you so much for the time that you've spent talking about this really important topic because without consent, without that body autonomy, our kiddos are lost in this
Right.
world. And it's a conversation that often we don't have. And I think we've brought up some really good points and hopefully tips and tools that can be used by caregivers. I know I'm going to see you again because we work together at Fostering
Yes.
Unity. But thank you for your heart and for your service to foster kiddos. I really value your input.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you for having me. And to all you caregivers out there, have these conversations, practice these conversations, and keep doing what you're doing to support our youth. We appreciate you so much.
Absolutely. Don't give up. We're with you.